Hello everyone out there in the global and digital world. Thanks for tuning in. It's time for another video, another connection. In the meantime, I'm sending blessings and good vibes. So in today's video, I want to talk about an issue and a topic that one way or another, the vast majority of practitioners face on their spiritual path. It also talks about different temperaments when it comes to spiritual practice and spiritual life. So it's hopefully very useful for everyone out there. And the topic is this. So one way or another, at some point, everyone faces the following dilemma. Do I, on the path, emphasize spiritual practice as a way of living spiritual life and a path to spiritual awakening? Or I simply live life recognizing some higher power that is guiding me and supporting me, which for the purposes of this video I call grace. So the dilemma is, it usually shows up as either or dilemma. So dilemma is, do I practice or do I simply live life, trust in grace and get some spiritual results? So in this video, I want to go through some pros and cons of both approaches. So what would be the pros of embodying the way of spiritual practice, of the way of effort? Clearly, you do it regularly, you create a container. After a while, there is a momentum. After a while, there is a deepening. After a while, people tell you, wow, you really changed what you're doing. So there are some signs even outside of yourself, universe speaking to you. So those are the pros. What would be the cons of spiritual practice? It's not easy to practice regularly. Sometimes you need to push through it. Sometimes it can be time consuming, so it takes time. You don't know how to organize your life. It can be expensive. For instance, spiritual retreats are one of the best ways of spiritual practice, but it can be pricey. And finally, I would say the biggest disadvantage of the way of effort or the way or the path of practice is that once you hook to the practice and once you over-identify with the practitioner or a spiritual seeker, it's very hard to recognize presence, and it's very hard to fully rest into the here and now, which is the final goal of spiritual practice. So the goal of spiritual practice is actually to end successfully spiritual practice in effortless effort, and that step is extremely tricky, and I actually needed a teacher for something like that to resolve that final step. So those were pros and cons for spiritual practice. So let's discuss now the path of grace. So by grace, I mean some higher power that is supporting you on the path, and you trust, you accept, and you simply live life, believing and trusting and acknowledging that grace. So what would be the pros of this approach to spiritual life? Clearly, you don't need to worry about the practice. Your days are more spontaneous because you don't need to structure them. So it's more spontaneous. There is less money involved into your spiritual life because you don't need to pay for various services, for instance, retreats, etc. But there is one big trick when it comes to the path of grace. The trick with grace is that it can be gentle or it can be fierce, or it can be very clear or it can be mysterious. And for the vast majority of us, when we step on the path, we are still identifying with our ego. What I noticed with myself and with many, and I'm talking about thousands of practitioners, when we identify with ego, so when we live out of ego identification, it's very hard to recognize fierce grace and mysterious grace. And to me, that's the biggest disadvantage of this approach. But let me elaborate a little bit more. So what would be examples of gentle grace. A friend or family member shows up in the right moment and help you. You meet somebody on the path, let's say a teacher or sangha, who radically changes and improves your spiritual life. You get hooked up to spiritual practice and it carries you. That's a form of grace too. Spiritual insight that changes your life can be a form of grace. Some sort of divine experience can be a form of grace. Spiritual enlightenment is actually a form of grace. So those were the positive examples. What would be the negative examples? You lose a job, you break up with a loved one, you're struggling with some disease, or we collectively go to a global pandemic, or war, or death of loved ones, or even our own death. So it is this negative grace, so to speak, this fierce grace, this mysterious grace that it's very hard for us to accept and understand and to see. And to me, that's the biggest disadvantage of the path of grace. But what I realize, especially on my own path, that actually there is a third reconciling solution, and I want to offer it to you. And that reconciling solution is to simply acknowledge and realize that spiritual practice is a form of grace. And when I look back in my own practice, I remember when I got hooked to meditation, it felt either like something came upon me as a gift, or that something within me got activated, which is going to carry me to some phenomenal place or even placeless place. So I felt like I'm a wave going towards the ocean, or I'm a flame wanted to become the internal fire, or I'm a grace moving towards even bigger grace. So I suggest that you approach your spiritual life in this reconciling manner, that you practice, but you also recognize grace on a deeper and deeper level. And that will be the reconciling solution. So that's your best bet. Your best bet is actually to practice and to recognize grace. In my first book, Spirit X Basic Principles, I wrote a lot about spiritual practice and grace, so check it out. I'll put the link in description. So I hope this helps. It's very important on the path to kind of resolve those ideas and to create kind of end-end solution. So effort or grace, it's actually not either or, it's actually end-end. The best thing is to do actually to practice and to realize grace. Whenever we create end-end situation in our minds, in our bodies, your spiritual life kind of blossoms. So I hope this helps. If this helps, please give us a like or subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you think about this and if you have any further questions. And I'll happily see you in the next video. Thank you very much and bye-bye.